So the United States just deployed a carrier strike group to the Caribbean to stop the flow of drugs, target the cartels, and maybe expand military operations into Venezuela. Oh, and the possibility of putting U.S. boots on the ground? Kind of avoiding that question right now. So, yeah, you could say things are getting kind of serious down there. Now, starting out with the announcement made just a few hours ago by the Pentagon that the Ford Carrier Strike Group is heading to the Caribbean, not just any carrier, but the largest and most advanced carrier in the U.S. military. Sean Parnell, Pentagon spokesperson, said, quote, "In support of the president's directive to dismantle transnational criminal organizations and counter narco-terrorism in defense of the homeland, the Secretary of War has directed the Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group and embarked Carrier Air Wing to the U.S. Southern Command Area of Responsibility. The enhanced U.S. force presence in the SOUTHCOM AOR will bolster U.S. capacity to detect, monitor, and disrupt illicit actors and activities that compromise the safety and prosperity of the United States homeland and our security in the Western Hemisphere." Now, a couple key notes here. This is the Carrier Strike Group. It is not just the carrier and associated air wing. It's yet to be determined or made public exactly what assets are moving to the Caribbean. USNI reported earlier today that the Ford was just spotted in port in Split, Croatia, saying they arrived there on Wednesday. So they expect that it would take at least 1 week for the carrier and the associated vessels to cross the Atlantic and get to the Caribbean. They also stress that it's not clear exactly what other ships will be joining the Ford. Now, the Ford Carrier Strike Group is made up of a number of vessels. We, of course, have the Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier, Carrier Air Wing 8, which is made up of squadrons of FA-18 fighter jets, EA-18 Growlers, and other support aircraft, Destroyer Squadron 2, which is made up of several guided missile destroyers such as the USS Bainbridge, USS Mahan, USS Mitscher, and USS Forrest Sherman, and then a couple of guided missile cruisers like the USS Normandy and USS Winston Churchill. That's a lot of firepower. It's a lot to take on drug trafficking, a lot to take on cartels, which of course raises the question of, are we actually going to do something with Venezuela? Now, Fox News had a great breakdown, I think, of the current firepower we are massing in the Caribbean. This was put together by Jennifer Griffin, their Pentagon correspondent. Here we go.
Well, John, the Pentagon has been reallocating assets from the Middle East and Pacific, moving warships to the Caribbean since August in what looks like a major military buildup for what many fear is an undeclared war. Just moments ago, the Pentagon announced that it is sending the USS Gerald R. Ford Aircraft Carrier Strike Group to the Southern Command region to help with counter-narcotics efforts. The Ford Strike Group right now is currently in the Mediterranean and will take at least 2 weeks to get there. This is the first time that the U.S. military will not have a carrier in the Middle East. For U.S. Southern Command, this is a massive buildup of force. In fact, 14% of the Navy's fleet is now in the Caribbean, according to IEJ media, including a buildup of 10,000 Marines and sailors, a dozen warships, a U.S. Navy nuclear-powered fast attack submarine, the USS Newport News, a vessel that could be needed elsewhere, a special operations mothership with drone capabilities, and 3 guided missile destroyers, USS Stockdale, Gravely, and Jason Dunham, and the USS Iwo Jima, an assault ship, part of an amphibious ready group. They left Naval Station Norfolk in August. The USS Lake Erie, a guided missile cruiser with 32 Tomahawk missiles, was pulled from the Pacific and is now operating near Puerto Rico, but focused on Venezuela.
Now, a couple things there really stood out to me. First is her saying that this is the first time we have not had a carrier in the Middle East. She didn't give a date. I mean, it sounds right that we've had one there probably nonstop for, at least 20 years at this point, maybe longer. But that plays into the second part here as well, where she said that 14% of the U.S. Navy is now deployed in the Caribbean. That is a massive number. And it really drives home between point 1 and point 2 there that the clear priority from the Pentagon right now is, U.S. Southern Command, the Western Hemisphere, Homeland Security, right? And I think something worth noting is that we have finite resources. The carrier is a perfect example. We didn't just grab a carrier that was sitting in the United States doing nothing and send it down off the coast of Venezuela. They are redeploying from the Middle East to U.S. Southern Command. So it's a shifting of priorities. And we saw this when strikes were imminent against Iran. When we picked up strikes against the Houthis, we saw a redeployment at that point of U.S. military resources, namely carriers from the Pacific. And they moved over to the Middle East to support ongoing operations. So there's this constant push and pull of our resources. We never have enough, as large as our military is. And right now we are seeing a clear priority shift from overseas operations to more here around the U.S. homeland. Now, just a few hours ago, right about the time we got notification of the aircraft carrier being redeployed, the Pentagon announced that they carried out the 10th kinetic strike, saying overnight they carried out a lethal kinetic strike on a vessel operated by Tren de Aragua, a designated terrorist organization trafficking narcotics in the Caribbean. 6 male narco-terrorists were aboard the vessel during the strike, which was conducted in international waters, and the first strike at night. They say all 6 terrorists were killed. No U.S. forces were harmed in the strike, adding, if you are a narco-terrorist smuggling drugs in the hemisphere, we will treat you like we treat Al-Qaeda. Day or night, we will map your networks, track your people, hunt you down, and kill you. So the calling out of Tren de Aragua as the organization that the guys on that boat belong to is new. We may have seen that once or twice, but the majority of the information coming out after these strikes is pretty broad. They just say that it was part of a designated terror organization, DTO. Notable here that they all are calling out Tren de Aragua specifically. Also, the mention of Al-Qaeda, the comparison of Tren de Aragua or any of these cartels to names that the United States and our people are familiar with. We're seeing more and more comparisons to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Secretary Hegseth did this just yesterday. We're going to play part of that clip in a minute. One of the challenges with kind of, to be blunt, hyping up a war in Venezuela or even against the cartels is these names are not familiar. It is hard to explain to somebody why Tren de Aragua is the same threat to the American people as Al-Qaeda. Now, I understand the damage that these cartels are doing to the United States, but Al-Qaeda has a much bigger name. They're much more known based off of course, the attacks on 9/11 and subsequent war on terror. You throw out a name like Tren de Aragua or the Cartels of the Suns, when you step away from people closely following this, it doesn't mean anything at all. So we're starting to see more of a comparison, kind of saying these groups here, they are Al-Qaeda, just a different name operating here in the Western Hemisphere. And I think a lot of that has to do with how this conflict is going to be sold to the general public. In fact, a part of that that's no doubt going to get pushback is the possibility of putting U.S. boots on the ground. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think there's a high likelihood for this. I think President Trump is relatively risk-averse when it comes to the use of military force, and a lot of the places that we've used military force during his administration has been in ways that have really limited the possibility of American casualties. So boots on the ground in Venezuela or Colombia or anywhere else really kind of flies in stark contrast to that. That said, it's a question that is coming up more and more, and from what I see, it looks like we're really kind of skirting answering it. This is, Stephen Miller, an advisor to Homeland Security, answering that question just earlier today.
Would the administration consider putting U.S. troops on the ground in any capacity inside Venezuela?
Well, I would refer to what Secretary Hegseth said yesterday in terms of how the Department of War is viewing the issue of the strategies that are being used to fight these terrorists in the Western Hemisphere. And I'll just continue to reiterate what I've said before. I know that you want more detailed answers than I can provide, but these are terrorists and they're going to be killed. Thank you very much.
And this is an escalation, Stephen, right? You would say moving.
I get it. This whole boots on ground is one of those things where you always want to say everything is possible, right? Especially if you're trying to get something out of the adversary. Maybe you don't want to cross that one off, but it's interesting because you have to imagine the bulk of the American population, if polled right now saying, do you want to put U.S. military boots on ground in Venezuela? Most are probably saying no. Wild guess, it's probably north of 75%. They would say no to that. So it seems like something that politically would benefit you if the answer was absolutely no, to come out and say, yeah, no way, we're not doing that. Maybe we'll work with our partners or we'll conduct long-range standoff strikes, but boots on ground, no, get that out of here. Now, Miller deferred a lot of those questions to Secretary Hegseth, saying, he talked about this yesterday, how we're going to go after those cartels. So let's give that clip a quick listen.
So the U.S. military, as I mentioned, nobody better in the world at mapping networks, identifying who's connected to who inside terrorist organizations. It's just the media is used to hearing that when it pertains to Afghanistan and Iraq and ISIS and Al-Qaeda. But if you reframe how you understand the world in our own hemisphere, that's exactly what these foreign terrorist organizations are. And so we will track them, we will map them, we will network them, and we will hunt them and kill them because they're trying to and they are killing and poisoning the American people. And inside that, we have all the license necessary, all the authorities necessary to take these kinetic strikes, and we'll continue to take them.
I actually think the way that the secretary phrased that raised more questions than necessarily answered. What I mean by that is, on the one hand, it makes sense to try to compare this. We're saying these are terrorist organizations. We're conducting drone strikes. We're framing this very similar to the global war on terror. But a big part of GWOT was that we had 100,000+ troops deployed for a long period of time on the ground fighting the Taliban, hunting down Al-Qaeda and Islamic State in Afghanistan, going after Al-Qaeda and remnants of other organizations across Iraq. So it's a very clear path to say if we're going to fight this war like we fought those wars, if we were going to dismantle these organizations like we did those, it required boots on the ground. And I think we're going to start seeing that question more and more. Personally, again, I think what the more likely route here are standoff strikes against maybe some drug production facilities or cartel-associated facilities in Venezuela. In fact, that's what CNN reported earlier today, saying President Trump is considering plans to target cocaine facilities and drug trafficking routes inside of Venezuela, though he has not yet made a decision on whether to move forward with them, 3 officials told CNN. They say CNN has previously reported Trump has also been weighing strikes inside Venezuela itself as part of a broader strategy aimed at weakening Maduro, and Trump himself has mused publicly about operations on land. The president, however, has not yet made clear what that would entail, and Secretary Rubio suggested drug routes might be targeted. Now, they added that some administration officials are pushing for regime change and say that the drug campaign could lead to the ouster of Maduro. That could happen by putting pressure on people around the Venezuelan leader who have benefited from the cartel's illicit revenue streams, potentially squeezing them so much they consider ways to oust the Venezuelan leader. Now, they do say that U.S. officials also acknowledge that an aggressive operation on a target inside of Venezuela would likely require congressional approval or at least congressional briefings before the administration can move forward. And that's been a hot topic. We've had some folks technically on both sides of the aisle. I think on the right side, it's only been Rand Paul pushing and saying, we need to get this thing in front of Congress. We need to find out what exactly is happening here. That question was asked of President Trump just yesterday, and his answer was, we're not going to war, so we don't need a declaration of war. We're just going to kill him. Here you go.
And Mr. President, if you are declaring war against these cartels and Congress is likely to approve of that process, why not just ask for a declaration of war?
Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country. Okay? We're going to kill them. You know, they're going to be like dead. Okay?
So for me, at least personally, there's 2 major questions that still need to be answered, and I hope reporters continue to push on these. First off, is Maduro the actual target? We've got a carrier strike group moving into the Caribbean. It's hard to look at some of these cartels, especially Trinidad and Tobago, and say, that's the focus. Maybe like all of the drugs in South America writ large, but Trinidad and Tobago, no. Cartel of the Suns, no. This looks like we're going after a nation state. So that's a question. Like, if that's the goal, if that's the plan, let's talk about that. Let's have that conversation. And the second moves into the legality. Right now, mostly what we're getting from the administration is trust us. There's been some classified briefings, but we've had a lot of leaks. And I get it, they're leaks, unnamed officials, but a lot of leaks saying, God, I don't know, there's just not a lot here that adds up, and there might be some real issues, which, again, maybe we'll see some of this presented in front of Congress. Now, as part of that questioning of the legality here, we're starting to see some regional implications that are worth talking to. The New York Times ran a piece just earlier today saying the U.S. campaign targeting what it says is drug trafficking from Venezuela has exposed Trinidad to the fallout. Unidentified bodies with burn marks and missing limbs showing up in its territory. They say the first body washed ashore on Trinidad's northeastern coast soon after the United States carried out its first strike in September on a boat in the Caribbean. Villagers said the corpse had burn marks on its face and was missing limbs, as if it had been mangled by an explosion. The tides deposited another corpse on a nearby beach days later, drawing a wake of vultures. Its face was simply unrecognizable, and its right leg appeared to have been blown off. Separately from the 2 unidentified corpses, the authorities are investigating reports that 2 Trinidadians were among those killed in a U.S. strike this month. Relatives of the men, identified as Chad Joseph and Rishi Semaru, have disputed claims that they were involved in drug trafficking. And the article goes on to say there's a challenge right now in Trinidad where they are supportive of this. They don't like Maduro at all, and they prefer and do have closer ties with the United States. So there's a hesitancy, alleged hesitancy, inside their government to push back on this, even when they've got bodies of supposed traffickers washing up on their shores. Another one to watch here is Colombia. So we just layered sanctions on the president of Colombia earlier today with the Treasury Department saying that they are sanctioning Gustavo Petro for his role in the global illicit drug trade, saying under President Petro, cocaine production in Colombia has exploded to record high rates. Petro has provided narco-terrorist organizations with benefits. And the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, said, quote, President Petro has allowed drug cartels to flourish and refused to stop this activity. Today, President Trump is taking strong action to protect our nation and make clear that we will not tolerate the trafficking of drugs into our nation. And one note when looking through the actual sanctions that I'll have linked in the description below, it says one of the issues here is that he has allied himself with the narco-terrorist regime of Nicolas Maduro and the Cartel de los Soles, or the Cartel of the Suns. So, look, I'm not well spun up on the Colombian drug trade. I do know more drugs come out of Colombia than Venezuela. A lot of them do come through Venezuela. I don't know if the volume of drugs is significantly up in the last couple of years or under Petro, right? So take that out of it. The timing here, we have to pay attention to. So a few days ago, about a week ago, we had Colombia's President Petro accuse the United States of killing a fisherman in one of the early strikes that was carried out in the Caribbean, saying this was one of our citizens. He had nothing to do with the drug trade. The direct response to that was President Trump coming out saying, we're going to sanction Colombia if you don't get a handle on the drug trade. So no real answer from the U.S. It sounds like Petro is still pushing forward with that allegation, maybe joining. He had asked to join up with Trinidad to try to pursue some sort of international look into whether or not their citizens are being killed. You can't separate that out entirely, the timing of that. Again, so whether the drug trade has gone up, down, sideways under Petro, I don't know. But we have to pay attention to the timing of Petro comes out and says, one of our citizens were killed. They were murdered by the United States. And within 48, 72 hours, there are sanctions layered personally, not on Colombia, the country, personally on President Petro, the one leveling those accusations against the United States. So it's a lot. There's a lot happening in the South right now. And I know we got a lot of other stuff going on and our attention's being pulled in a million different directions, but all the indications here are that we are ramping up for larger military operations, probably against Venezuela. So do our best to keep an eye on it. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.